The UK Gambling Commission has published a report suggesting the number of child gamblers in Britain has quadrupled in just 2 years. A BBC article says that 450,000 kids aged between 11 and 16 regularly bet, which is more than the number of kids who smoke the cigarettes, go on the booze, or do the drugs. So the report, as per the BBC, has found that over the past 12 months, 39% of 11 to 16-year-olds have spent their own money on gambling, and 14% in the previous week. Young people who have gambled in the past week spent an average of 16 quid, 6% had gambled online using a parent or guardian's account, and 60% of young people think their parents would prefer them not to gamble at all, but only 19% said their parents set strict rules about it. Even though gambling is illegal in the UK for under 18s, a number of kids have said they've managed to do it in betting shops or in online gambling sites anyway. Now, what's that got to do with us on this video game channel here? Well, which industry sells unregulated gambling within its products? Which industry has a number of companies recently found to be going against Belgian gambling laws? Which industry has been making gambling fun? Which industry was recently suggested by the Australian Gambling Commission to encourage problem gambling within its audience? Just a short while after Ubisoft came out and bragged that loot boxes had been a boon for the gaming industry, out comes this report that says during the time loot boxes have risen in popularity, the number of child gamblers has exploded. And if you think I'm just jumping to conclusions on my own, well, I woke up this morning to an inbox filled with people telling me about this story, but more importantly, the story itself and the Gambling Commission's report name-checks video game loot boxes as an issue. To quote the article again, the Commission also raised concerns that close to 1 million young people had been exposed to gambling through loot boxes in video games or on smartphone apps. These can involve a player paying money for an item that is only revealed after purchasing. Now, what do I keep saying is going to happen? I keep saying, and I keep being proven right, that if the video game industry doesn't want to regulate itself, it's going to keep drawing negative attention to itself. Eventually, someone's going to step in and regulate it for them, as we've already seen in countries like Belgium. And we've certainly seen politicians interested in doing that here in the US. And that's the problem with most industries, they don't want to regulate themselves. So what is it that people say? Regulations are written in blood? Because something will go wrong, because big companies are reckless and will let something go wrong, just because they're making money in the immediate, and someone else will force the regulations upon them. And then they'll cry and whine and say, well, we don't want these restrictions. Well, you could have avoided it, mate. I've never pushed for government regulation of loot boxes, I've only warned about it, and while that's not happening in the UK yet, reports like this only make said regulation easier to do in future. It's the foundation being laid for the road toward it. I would prefer the industry to rein itself in and calm down with the bullshit on its own terms, but in lieu of that, I will gladly see any of these greedy fuckers get their wrists slapped. I don't push for gambling regulation, but I will gloat about it. And some people might say that gambling laws would stifle creativity, but that's not the kind of creativity I want to see in the video game industry. Aggressive monetization is about the only innovation many of these major publishers care about now, and frankly, I don't care if that goes away. Fact of the matter is, loot boxes are gambling, and the only reason that they're not legally recognised as gambling around the world is because they're not technically gambling in the eyes of the law, and that's because video game technology is new and changing all the time. The legal system is not, and it often struggles and takes time to understand new technologies and emergent ideas. I mean, just look at how archaic copyright law is when you consider what the internet's become and how long that's been an issue. But it only takes a handful of politicians to give a damn for the game industry to need to start yanking its collar and going, yo, as we've already seen in Belgium, and as we're starting to see hints of whenever a gambling commission in any country looks at loot boxes and ties them intrinsically to traditional definitions of gambling. A growing number of countries have already done that. They've had gambling commissions look at loot boxes, and most of those findings have suggested that yes, loot boxes are gambling. Gambling that right now is completely unregulated, which is a problem because gambling is regulated for a reason. Gambling addiction is a problem, and I do believe that many video games with loot boxes can worsen problem gambling, if not actively encourage it, because hey, it makes money for the publishers, and they don't give a fucking damn, and they won't give a damn, not until some third party makes them give a damn. And some of them, like Electronic Arts, will throw a little tantrum and say, no, we're not going to follow the law, again as we've seen in Belgium, because EA believes that strongly in selling gambling to people unregulated that it's prepared to die on the hill for it. They're making money hand over fist for relatively nothing, for stuff that used to be in games for free, now hidden behind randomized boxes and crates, pulling the same psychological strings that traditional gambling does and getting away with it. And I gotta wonder how many of them feel they can get away with it forever, and how many might know that what they're doing is fucking wrong and they might get in trouble for it in the future and are just trying to rake in as much as they can while the going's good. And in the future, if loot boxes do get regulated en masse, I've gotta wonder what game publishers will do, because shareholders of course only ever expect these companies to make more money than they made last time. It's always about dragging yourself to the next quarter, and loot boxes have helped that money explode already to unsustainable numbers, let alone how hard it'll be to top their earnings should the gambling go away. And as I've said before, if the game industry is relying on loot boxes, if it's relying on gambling to make its money and keep things going, then this industry is fucked. This is a broken video game industry we're looking at right here. The sheer thirst for money, the desperation for money, and the recklessness in obtaining said money, well, it's a mess. And I know some people are sick of me talking about the game industry's brokenness, and I know some people are sick of me talking about loot boxes, and I will stop talking about this when it stops becoming a problem. And that's not down to me. I'm not putting unregulated gambling in video games. I'm not shoveling loot boxes into games that are sold to kids aged 3 and up, and fighting for the right to do that in a country where they said, no, that's not on. Fuck the AAA video game industry, it's a broken piece of shit. And right now, in this current time of talking, it doesn't deserve to succeed, not if this is how it has to. But it doesn't have to, not really. The only reason it quote-unquote has to is because it made a rod for its own back by exploding so much with microtransactions and loot boxes that shareholders are just gonna want more and more and more, and fuck them too. And fuck their golf courses, which they're always on probably. Literally, I mean, in all the holes.